Shalom, I'm Rabbi Stephen Sachs. When we think of tefillah, when we think of prayer, we think of something that's boring, something we say by rote, something that often fails to inspire us. Let me share a story with you entitled, An Orthodox Woman Learns About Prayer by Debbie Firestone, recently appeared in the Joffa Journal. Debbie explains that during Pesach, her husband was in the hospital. On the last day of Chol Hamoed Pesach, the last day of the intermediate days of Pesach, they got a call from a chaplain, a female rabbi. She asked if she could visit Shvi Shal Pesach, the seventh day of Pesach. Debbie and her husband said, sure. Now, they were very curious to meet this woman. After all, being Orthodox, they had had limited experience with female rabbis. Next day, the chaplain comes up, having a conversation, and asks if she could make a mishaberach, a prayer for the sick. Debbie and her husband said, of course, but we're wondering, how in the world is she going to manage to remember his name and go back to shul and make the mishaberach? Of course, it was Yom Tov. She couldn't write it down. But what she did shocked Debbie and her husband. Instead of trying to memorize his Hebrew name, she took his hand, put it over his chest, and made a mishaberach right there and then. Debbie and her husband were shocked and deeply moved as well. After the incident, Debbie did a little research and found out that initially the mishaberach was made at the bedside. Only later on was it moved into the shul and did it become part of a fixed service. When we think of tefillah, we think of prayer, we think of fixed, time-bound prayer. Shachrei, Mincha, and Mariv. But prayer, in its original form, was a spontaneous supplication. We have a great example of that in this week's Parsha. As Yaakov or Jacob is fleeing from his brother Esau, he cries out to God, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this matter which I go, and will give me bread to eat and a garment to put on, so that I may come back to my father's house in peace. V'haya Hashem li le'lokim, then the Lord shall be my God. It's a very problematic prayer. Jacob is saying that God will only be his God if God returns him in safety to his father's home? Jacob, out of all people, the grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac, should know better. He should know that the Brit, the covenant, is unconditional. Despite that fact, it's a beautiful, heartfelt prayer. I was thinking about this earlier in the week, then I went into Daven Mincha. As I was reciting Ashrei, a line which I've said thousands of times and I've never really thought much about, quite honestly, suddenly jumped out at me. Karov Hashem lechol karavai, lechol asher yikru ve'emet. God is close to all those who call upon him. All of those who call upon him with sincerity. What can we learn here? We learn that God desires prayers, even imperfect, problematic prayers, such as Jacob's prayer. We also learn that you could speak to God anywhere. You could call out to God from anywhere. Jacob calls out to God from the fields. We could even call out to God in a spontaneous fashion in the middle of our fixed, time-bound prayer. How do we do so? At the end of the Amida, there's a paragraph, Elohai nitzor l'shoni mirah. Lord, please guard my tongue. What is this paragraph doing there? The last part of the Amida is the prayer for shalom, and that should be the end of the Amida. Yet, we have this paragraph here. The Talmud teaches us that after saying the prayer for shalom, the final prayer of the Amida, we're supposed to make a spontaneous supplication of God. Several of these supplications that great rabbis said were documented in the Talmud. The rabbis feared the average person would not be articulate enough, would not be thoughtful enough to come up with their own personal supplication. So they took one of these prayers which were documented in the Talmud, placed it in the siddur after the prayer for shalom, and in a sense this has now become another part of the fixed prayer. It's become the end of the Amida for all intents and purposes. But in a way, that's unfortunate. Yes, Eloheinu Tzor L'Shani Mirah is a beautiful prayer. But what I would encourage you to do is take this opportunity, instead of saying Eloheinu Tzor L'Shani Mirah, to say your own personal supplication. If you need help with something going on at home, with a family problem, call out to God. If you need help with a work problem, call out to God. Whatever it is, call out to God. And if you really have your heart set on still saying Eloheinu Tzor L'Shani Mirah, save that paragraph and then add in your own personal supplication. Bottom line is, God is waiting to hear from you. Call out from the bottom of your heart and let God hear your prayers.